What actually happens when we die? For millennia, this question has occupied religion, philosophy, and science. Today, we're examining the full spectrum, from biological reality and near-death experiences to the most unsettling theories of the afterlife. But before we explore heaven or nothingness, we begin with what can be measured. We start with the clinical truth. Imagine a hospital room. The monitors flatline. A doctor calls the time of death. To every observer in the room, it's over. But medically, death is not a single instant. It is a process. When the heart stops, a condition known as cardiac arrest, blood flow to the brain ceases immediately. Within 10 to 20 seconds, consciousness fades. Yet, brain cells do not die the moment the heart stops. The brain shuts down in stages. Studies show that electrical activity can persist after cardiac arrest. In some monitored cases, researchers have recorded brief bursts of organized brain activity minutes after the pulse was lost. Scientists continue to debate what these surges represent: disordered shutdown patterns or something more structured. Without oxygen, brain tissue begins to suffer injury within minutes. After 4 to 6 minutes, the risk of permanent damage rises sharply. However, factors such as temperature and rapid medical intervention can extend this window, and within that window, reports emerge. A small percentage of cardiac arrest survivors describe awareness during resuscitation. They recall conversations, sounds, or visual details from the room while they were clinically dead. These accounts do not prove consciousness exists beyond the brain, but they challenge the idea that awareness stops instantly. Chemically, the brain enters crisis mode. Neurotransmitters surge. Some researchers propose that powerful endogenous compounds, possibly including DMT, may be released under extreme stress, though this remains unproven in humans at death. Biologically, the sequence is straightforward. The heart stops, brain activity declines, cells begin to die. Between cardiac arrest and irreversible brain damage, there is a brief and unstable interval. What, if anything, is experienced during that interval remains one of neuroscience's most difficult questions. Before we turn to myth or belief, we must acknowledge this physical reality. The heart can stop, and for a few measured minutes, the brain may not be silent. If death is simply a hard drive crashing, the experience should be chaos, random, disorganized, a fading static. But when researchers began documenting near-death experiences, they didn't find randomness. They found patterns. Across cultures, ages, and belief systems, survivors describe a similar sequence of events. It usually begins with separation. Patients report hovering above their own bodies, observing doctors, hearing conversations, noticing details in the room while they were clinically unconscious. Not dreaming, watching. Then comes the movement. Many describe traveling through darkness toward a distant light. The light is not described as blinding, but as a presence, warm, persistent, pulling. Next is the life review. This is not a slideshow of memories. Survivors describe reliving moments from their past as immersive events, sometimes experiencing the emotional impact of their actions from another person's perspective. Then comes the encounter. People report meeting deceased relatives or figures interpreted through their cultural lens: Christ, an angel, a spiritual guide, or a being of light. The interpretation varies. The structure does not. Separation, movement, reflection, encounter. Not every account is peaceful. A smaller percentage describe distressing experiences, intense fear, isolation, or an empty darkness instead of light. These cases are documented, though less discussed. Science offers possible explanations. Oxygen deprivation can narrow vision toward a central light. Temporal lobe activity can produce out-of-body sensations. neurochemical surges can intensify memory and emotion. Each theory explains part of the experience. None fully explains why similar narratives appear across disconnected cultures. Near-death experiences do not prove an afterlife. These individuals were revived. They did not cross an irreversible threshold. But they show this. In the narrow window between cardiac arrest and recovery, consciousness can generate experiences that feel structured, meaningful, and intensely real. The question is, what happens when that window closes permanently? To explore that, we move from what can be measured to what humanity has believed for thousands of years. For thousands of years, long before brain scans or resuscitation studies, humanity had already formed its answers. In the Abrahamic traditions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, death is not an ending. It is a transition. In Christianity, the soul faces judgment. Life carries moral weight, and death reveals its outcome. Some traditions describe immediate judgment. Others include an intermediate state of purification. But the core idea remains: eternal union with, or separation from, the divine. In Islam, death marks entry into barzakh, an intermediate realm. Awareness continues. The soul is questioned. At the end of time comes resurrection and final judgment, based on faith and deeds. Judaism presents a more varied landscape. Some traditions emphasize olam haba, the world to come. Others focus less on detailed afterlife descriptions and more on righteous living in this world. Yet the concept of resurrection and continued existence appears across many interpretations. What unites these systems is structure. Identity survives. Memory persists. Consequences endure. Death is not random. It is accounted for. Beyond judgment-based systems, other cultures proposed a different framework: the cycle. In Hinduism, death is a transition within samsara, the repeating cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. The soul, or Atman, continues according to karma. The ultimate goal is moksha, liberation from the cycle entirely. Buddhism reframes this idea. It teaches that there is no permanent, unchanging soul, but a continuing flow of consciousness shaped by action. The cycle repeats until nirvana, the end of craving and the cessation of suffering. Here, death is not a courtroom, it is a doorway. Across civilizations, two dominant frameworks emerge: judgment, or return, eternal destination, or repetition. Both rest on a shared assumption that consciousness does not simply vanish. But belief answers a question science cannot test, and that leaves one possibility still waiting in the dark. What if, when the brain goes silent, there is nothing at all? If there is no judgment, no rebirth, and no continuation, we are left with the simplest and perhaps most unsettling possibility: nothing. From a strict materialist perspective, consciousness is a product of the brain. Every thought, every memory, every aspect of identity is tied to electrical patterns and chemical signals. When the brain stops functioning permanently, those patterns do not migrate somewhere else. They do not transform. They do not persist. They end. This view does not describe floating in darkness. It does not describe awareness of nothingness. It describes the absence of experience altogether. Consider the billions of years before you were born. There was no sensation, no perception, no awareness of time. Under this framework, death is simply a return to that state. The philosopher Epicurus argued that death should not frighten us for this reason. Where I am, death is not. Where death is, I am not. There is no overlap. Modern neuroscience aligns closely with this model. Damage specific regions of the brain and personality changes. Disrupt neural circuits and memory dissolves. Suppress brain activity with anesthesia and consciousness disappears. The implication is direct. If the brain generates consciousness, then when the generator shuts down, the output stops. Some find this view bleak. Others find it grounding. No eternal punishment, no endless cycle, no waiting room, only the finite span of a single life. Yet materialism leaves one question unanswered. Why does subjective awareness exist at all? Neuroscience can map correlations between brain activity and perception, but it cannot fully solve what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. Why physical processes produce an inner experience in the first place. Materialism explains what stops. It does not fully explain what starts. If this model is correct, death is not a journey. It is the permanent closing of the only window through which you ever perceived the universe. No fear, no light, no continuation. Just silence, without anyone left to hear it. But even this may not be the final explanation, because beyond religion and beyond strict materialism, some modern thinkers ask a different question. What if consciousness is not confined to the brain at all? In recent decades, a small but persistent group of researchers and philosophers has explored a different possibility. What if the brain does not create consciousness, but filters it? In this model, the brain functions less like a generator and more like a receiver. Instead of producing awareness from scratch, it limits or tunes into a broader field of consciousness, much like a radio translates a signal that already exists. If the radio breaks, the broadcast does not disappear. The receiver simply stops functioning. This idea, often called filter theory, appears in several modern frameworks. Some physicists have speculated that consciousness may be a fundamental feature of reality, embedded at a level deeper than biology. Certain interpretations of quantum mechanics have even raised questions about whether observation itself plays a structural role in the universe. These ideas remain controversial and unproven, but they attempt to answer the question materialism struggles with. How does physical matter produce subjective experience at all? If consciousness is fundamental rather than manufactured by the brain, then death would not extinguish it. It would remove the biological filter. In this view, what you call you is a localized expression of something larger. This aligns with philosophical positions such as panpsychism, which suggests that a primitive form of awareness exists throughout the universe. Not human thought, not personality, but a basic underlying sentience woven into matter itself. Under these models, death is not a blackout. It is a transition in perspective. But speculation reaches its limit here. These theories do not provide measurable evidence of survival after death. They offer conceptual frameworks, attempts to reconcile inner experience with physical law. Still, they introduce a possibility that cannot be dismissed outright. If the brain does not generate consciousness, then brain death may not be the end of awareness, only the end of a specific configuration. Whether that configuration dissolves, transforms, or continues in some unknown form remains unanswered. And that leaves us with the only defensible conclusion: we do not know. Science can measure neural activity, religion can offer meaning, philosophy can construct models. But the moment after irreversible death remains beyond direct observation. What follows may be judgment, it may be return, it may be silence, it may be something we lack the language to describe. Every theory reflects the limits of the tools we use to explore it. For now, the question remains open. And that brings us to the final and perhaps most honest position: uncertainty. Across science, religion, and philosophy, one pattern repeats. Every explanation reflects the lens through which we are looking. Biology describes electrical decline. Theology describes moral transition. Eastern traditions describe return. Materialism describes silence. Each model answers the question in its own language, but none can observe what lies beyond the threshold. Near-death experiences occur in those who returned. Religious doctrines rely on faith. Philosophical systems rely on logic. Scientific models rely on measurement. The moment after the brain permanently ceases to function remains outside all of these tools. That does not mean nothing happens. It means we do not yet possess a method to verify what does. As pattern-seeking creatures, we construct narratives to make the unknown bearable. Some offer comfort. Others offer accountability. Some attempt to remove fear entirely. But uncertainty is not weakness. It is honesty. Strip away the stories, and only three broad possibilities remain. Consciousness continues, consciousness transforms, or consciousness ends. Every belief system ever proposed fits within one of those categories. Until death becomes reversible beyond the final, irreversible line, the answer will remain beyond reach. What we can say with certainty is this: you are alive now. You are conscious now. Every theory about death is built from the perspective of someone who has not yet crossed it permanently. Perhaps the deeper mystery is not what happens after the heart stops, but why awareness exists at all. That question is still unfolding, and for now, that is enough.